It's such a bright and cheerful afternoon. I love it when the sun comes in like this. But look at this. I was wondering what is throwing that, and look, it's just this small, the golden bit of my I don't know if you can see it. I need to get it in the same frame. Look at that. Isn't that so funny? Just that one small bit of gold casting a golden rainbow all the way across the ceiling. I think it must be symbolic. To fill you all in on another week of Febregency reading. I did start Lover's Vows on Valentine's Day, which seemed very appropriate. I did finally get to my Febregency check-in blog post, so if you haven't seen that yet, it's on bookishprincess.substack.com. You should go check it out. But I mentioned there that with Lover's Vows, I was almost a little hesitant to pick it up because I have such a high opinion of Jane Austen's heroine's judgment, and the way Fanny disapproves of Lover's Vows made me think, well, should I even bother reading it? But it must not have been that bad, I figured, since obviously Jane Austen read it herself in order to reference it in her novel. And most of the scandalous happenings in the play have happened in the past, and now we're kind of seeing the denouement. So I don't know if I should give a spoiler warning or not, because a lot of this plot material we learned pretty early on in the play, but there's a warning just in case you want to come and do it fresh. I thought I'd give you a little cliff notes of who's who. So if you've read Mansfield Park, or if you're going to read Mansfield Park, which you should, it's amazing. Now you'll know what the plot is and who these characters are. It was really exciting to figure out, okay, Agatha, in the book, Mariah Bertram plays the character of Agatha, and Henry Crawford plays the character of Frederick, and you kind of know who they are, but reading them, their actual parts in the play was exciting. So Agatha is one of the main characters. She has a checkered past, and when she was young, she let her passions run away with her, and she believed a young man who promised he would marry her, and she got pregnant, and then the young man did not marry her, and she got kicked out by her parents. She really relied on the local priest who was kind to her, and she was able to get some work to support her son since they'd been cast off by everybody else. When her son grew up, he went into the army, and then Agatha fell on hard times again. So at the opening of the story, she's getting kicked out of her lodgings, and her son, Frederick, is actually coming home from the army to ask for his birth certificate, and he's looking for his mother, and he's shocked to find her begging on the side of the road, and that's when she tells him that he has no birth certificate, that he was an illegitimate child, and it comes out who his father was. It is Baron Wildenheim. Am I saying that correctly? In the play, that they act in Mansfield Park, I never quite realized the connections between the characters. This is a very soap opera-y kind of play. Most of the characters are very dramatic and tragic, which in Mansfield Park, many of the characters want more of a tragedy, but Tom Bertram wants a comedy. And there are actually a couple comedic characters, the butler and the cottager, and you can see how Tom would have, in fact, really loved those characters. But the rest of them are all very melodramatic. And there's a very emotional scene early on where Frederick recognizes his mother, Agatha, on the road. And it is written into the play that they hug each other, that, you know, he falls on his mother's breast and all these things, which, you know, mother and son, that makes sense. But in Mansfield Park, those parts are being played by Maria and Henry. Maria is engaged to Mr. Rushworth, but attracted to Henry. And Henry is kind of a rogue who is encouraging Maria's attraction and flirting with her nonstop. So you can totally see how it would be very inappropriate for those two to play this scene in particular. I'm realizing that if you haven't read Mansfield Park, this explanation is probably very confusing. This explanation is mainly for Mansfield Park readers. I feel like I need to do another character map. I've done character maps of the Jane Austen novels because sometimes those get a little confusing, but then add in who plays who in Lover's Vows. It becomes an even more confusing. Also, every time I'm saying Maria from Maria Bertram from Mansfield Park, I'm wanting to say Maria Edgeworth because I just read her books. Maria Bertram from Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. As I mentioned, in the book, she's engaged to a man named Mr. Rushworth. Mr. Rushworth plays another character in Lover's Vows named Count Castle. And I didn't know this from Mansfield Park, but you find out in Lover's Vows that Count Castle and Mr. Rushworth are literally fulfilling the same exact role in both literary plots. Both of them are the unwanted but tolerated because they're rich and influential suitor. And it is kind of extraordinary that Maria Bertram doesn't wake up enough. She's acting in this play, so she's obviously read the play, but she doesn't open her eyes and see the parallels to her own situation, because in Lover's Vows, one, we see that giving way to your passions is a bad idea and leads to suffering and years of misery. That's what happens to Agatha, the character Maria is playing in the play. And then two, that it's a bad idea to marry a rich man you don't love. Count Castle is clearly ridiculous. It would clearly be a bad idea to marry him. And so it's kind of ridiculous that Maria, even though she's presented with an example of reasons not to do those two things, she does both of them. There is actually a line in Mansfield Park. It's so great. It's so psychologically acute, where Jane Austen says that Maria can see that things aren't right. She wants Henry to propose to her so that she can break it off with Mr. Rushworth, but she doesn't know if that's going to happen. And Jane Austen says that Maria just throws a mist over everything and hopes that when it clears, it will look different. And it's that is so true. It is so easy to do that in life when you have problems and difficulties and you just throw a mist over it so you don't have to look at it. But you should look it in the face, obviously. So to return to Lover's Vows, remember we had Agatha and Frederick, mother and son, meeting along the road. The Baron was the unfaithful lover and the father of Frederick. He went away overseas, got married to another woman, had a daughter. A daughter's now grown up, and his first wife died. So the Baron has now finally come back home with his daughter. His daughter is Amelia. This is another name that will be familiar to you if you read Mansfield Park in that book. Amelia is ultimately played by Mary Crawford. And again, their characters are so similar. Amelia is very outspoken and, just not very delicate on certain topics. And Mary Crawford is similarly, just has very London manners. You can see in Mansfield Park, there are some parallels between the action of the play and the action of the novel. But reading the play, the full play, you see even more parallels. The Baron, for example, he's Amelia's father, and he wants Amelia to marry Count Castle, the ridiculous rich suitor. Amelia does not want to marry Count Castle. She wants to marry Anhalt. Anhalt is a local clergyman in Mansfield Park. It is played by Edmund. Again, like so many parallels. You feel like Jane Austen, when she read Lover's Vows, must have been like, well, if I move this here and that there, like it just must have been such a fun process piecing that together. It kind of reminds me in Much Ado About Nothing, a Shakespeare play. There are a lot of parallels between that and Pride and Prejudice. And when I most recently reread Much Ado About Nothing, I felt like I could almost picture Jane Austen like reading it and like having all sorts of ideas. Anyway, in Lover's Vows, Amelia wants to marry Anhalt, but her father, the Baron, wants her to marry Count Cassel. However, the Baron is a little bit conflicted because he wants his daughter to be able to marry for love, because he kind of regrets that he abandoned his youthful love and did not marry for love. So he doesn't want to force Amelia to marry this rich and influential suitor, but he kind of would rather she falls in love with someone who's rich and influential. Like he hopes that she is in love with Count Cassel because that would just be convenient. And Sir Thomas Bertram in Mansfield Park, it's like the exact same scenario with Maria and Mr. Rushworth. Like Sir Thomas can see that Mr. Rushworth is kind of a ridiculous young man, but he just hopes that Maria is going to be okay with him because he's rich and influential. Actually, though, to be fair, Count Cassel is much more of a rogue than Mr. Rushworth. Mr. Rushworth is mostly just ridiculous. Anyway, you can probably fill in the soap opera plotline of Lover's Vows now that we've set up the characters. Of course, the Baron does meet his son, Frederick, and there's a very dramatic revelation that this is his son. Eventually, however, we do get the happy ending, and the Baron really does kind of get it, like the full guilt and the full sense of shame and sin for what he did in abandoning Agatha. He really comes to realize that. There was this great line, I should have highlighted it. The Baron wants to make amends to Agatha, but at first thinks that he won't marry her, but then Anhalt comes in and is like, no, you need to marry her. Anhalt asks the Baron, probably when you were young and you were wooing Agatha, you know, you pledged your honor, you called God to witness these promises that you made and then you broke. Anhalt says, the witness you called at that time was the being who sees you now. What you gave in pledge was your honor, which you must redeem. Therefore, thank heaven that it is in your power to redeem it. By marrying Agatha, the ransom is made, and she brings a dower greater than any princess can bestow. Peace to your conscience. I just thought that was so neat because Agatha is obviously penniless, and at first the Baron is like, well, I'm not going to marry her because my relations won't like it, and she's penniless, and she's a peasant. And Anhalt saying, well, she will bring peace to your conscience. That's pretty great. So anyway, definitely enjoyed Lover's Vows. I should have sat down and tried to think out a way to explain it better because I'm worried that was very confusing, but I've been working really hard on the Book of Cymbeline this week. It is currently Sunday afternoon. Usually I try to film way earlier than like the night before, you know, because my video will go up tomorrow on Monday. I was able to do my Febregency reading, which I was very pleased at, but I'm afraid I wasn't able to organize my thoughts as well as I would have liked for this video. In case you didn't see on Instagram or my community post here, the second Book of Cymbeline is coming out on Friday, February 24th, so that's this week, just a couple more days. The ebook is available to pre-order now. It's on Amazon. The paperback will be available on the 24th on Friday. There are 18 new illustrations. I'm really pleased with how they turned out. I do think there were things that I learned from the first Book of Cymbeline that I was able to put into practice in the second. One of them was I realized I wanted to do full page illustrations. Before I'd done some of the illustrations kind of horizontal, but this one I did them all vertically oriented, and so they take up the whole page and they look really great. Although I will warn you guys, especially for the paperback, because there's more ink and more color, the paperback is going to be a little bit more expensive. I'm publishing this myself through Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon's self-publishing platform. And when you make a paperback available, there is a minimum price you can charge for it because of the printing cost. Like basically, when someone orders the paperback, then they print it and ship it to them. I think they're pretty nice quality. Here, for example, here is the Book of Cymbeline, the original, which is also available. So yeah, it's very exciting. Now there's two in the series. This second volume picks up where the last left off. So this was from summer to fall, and it was when tiny Cymbeline. She was like a month old, showed up in the tree hollow outside my farmhouse, and I had no plans to adopt a cat. I knew nothing about cats, so just that bewildering but magical time. It was really fun to describe. And then the second one is A Kitten's Tale from Fall to Winter. So this actually carries us through Halloween, through the changing fall leaves, through Thanksgiving, through Christmas. The snowdrops are coming up at the end, and Cymbeline is growing and growing and like very ready to go. She's ready for adventure. She's eager to claim new territory. It was just so fun to look back on that time and describe all the little events. See, it is so hard to describe these books because they certainly are based on a true story and follow the true events, but I have to confess to you that I can't actually read Cymbeline's mind. So I had to imagine what she would think and what she would say to herself, and like the little friends she would make, their conversations. She makes some friends in the new book. That was really, really fun. Yeah, so it's kind of a mix between fiction and nonfiction. The category also, I feel like, is difficult to pinpoint because the length, this one was about 8,000 words, and the new one is about 10,000 words, a little bit longer. The fact that they both have the illustrations and the length and the subject matter about a kitten are what make me describe it as a children's book, but the reading level is definitely like middle grade or adult. It's not a young or a new reader. It could be fun for like a parent to read to their child as a bedtime story, or good for an advanced young reader to read by themselves. They might pick up some new words because I did not hold back with the vocabulary. That's part of the magic of a book, is having fun vocabulary in it. So if you're planning your TBR for middle grade March, this and the new one actually would both fulfill two of the prompts because both of them have the sky on the cover, and they also both were published within the last year, because this came out in September 2022, and of course the second one comes out in February 2023. So anyway, if you were looking for an excuse or a sign to pick up the Book of Cymbeline, that should be it. But yeah, did I even tell you what the price of the new one will be? My brain is just fried this week. This one was $9.99. The new one is $12.99. I couldn't make it any cheaper. They wouldn't let me. And I think it is because all of the illustrations are like this, whereas in this one, some of the illustrations were just, the half page. But the ebook is the same price, $2.99. So you have those two options. And then I did actually have one other Febregency read to tell you about. See, both of my Febregency reads this week were short, which I think was really good. Lover's Vows, I ended up reading mostly in one sitting on Valentine's Day. And then Mary Shelley is the other one that I've been reading. I'm not quite finished with that, but I am probably like 3/4 of the way through. It is, hold on, it's got a mouthful of a title. Let's find the title. History of 6 Weeks Tour Through a Part of France, Switzerland, Germany, and Holland by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. The first part of this is a journal, and the second part is letters. The first part was a trip that happened in 1814. The second part is a trip that happened in 1816, and they were traveling with Lord Byron. They were staying on near Geneva by the lake during a thunderstorm, and they had a ghost story competition, and that is when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, was inspired with the Frankenstein story. So it's really fun to read these letters of the trip that like inspired this book. This scene in particular, you can just see how she would have been inspired to write Frankenstein. The thunderstorms that visit us are grander and more terrific than I have ever seen before. We watch them as they approach from the opposite side of the lake, observing the lightning play among the clouds in various parts of the heavens, and dart in jagged figures upon the piny heights of Jura, dark with the shadow of the overhanging cloud, while perhaps the sun is still shining cheerily upon us. One night we enjoyed a finer storm than I had ever beheld before. The lake was lit up, the pines on Jura made visible, and all the scene illuminated for an instant when a pitchy blackness succeeded, and the thunder came in frightful bursts over our heads amidst the darkness. There are some amazing descriptions that make you want to go to Europe, although it definitely does not make you want to go to Europe during the Regency period, because the headaches and inconveniences and dangers of travel just sound so crazy and unpleasant. The journey on the road was a headache, like either on foot or in a carriage, because they tried both. She ends up loving traveling by river. Even after the inconveniences of the road, they can't find anywhere nice to stay. Like all of the hotels and lodgings are just terrible. We endeavored to find a habitation, but could only procure 2 unfurnished rooms in an ugly big house called the Chateau. These we hired at £1 a month, had beds moved into them, and the next day took possession. But it was a wretched place with no comfort or convenience. It was with difficulty that we could get any food prepared, As it was cold and rainy, we ordered a fire. They lighted an immense stove which occupied a corner of the room. It was long before it heated, and when hot, the warmth was so unwholesome that we were obliged to throw open our windows to prevent a kind of suffocation. So yeah, she definitely does not hold back on the realities and pains of travel. But she does also write about the inspiring sights. We have not yet found out any very agreeable walks, but you know our attachment to water excursions. We have hired a boat, and every evening at about 6 o'clock we sail on the lake, which is delightful, whether we glide over a glassy surface or are speeded along by a strong wind. The waves of this lake never afflict me with that sickness that deprives me of all enjoyment in a sea voyage. On the contrary, the tossing of our boat raises my spirits and inspires me with unusual hilarity. Twilight here is of short duration, but at present we enjoy the benefit of an increasing moon and seldom return until 10 o'clock, when, as we approach the shore, we are saluted by the delightful scent of flowers and new-mown grass, and the chirp of the grasshoppers and the song of the evening birds. There was another part where she was describing their travel. This is a river, I believe. The roost is exceedingly rapid, and we descended several falls, one of more than 8 feet. I didn't even know a boat loaded with a ton of passengers could make it down an 8-foot waterfall. There is something very delicious in this sensation, when at one moment you are at the top of a fall of water, and before the second has expired you are at the bottom, still rushing on with the impulse which the descent has given. The waters of the Rhone are blue, those of the Reuss are of a deep green. She does love her water journeys. I love her description of their journey along the Rhine. I think she says they're reading Lord Byron. He had been describing that same route, maybe. And I believe the second trip took place with Lord Byron, and the second trip seems like it was more comfortable. Or maybe she just wasn't describing the discomforts quite as much in the letters in the second part. But yeah, when they were traveling along the Rhine, she writes about how another boat full of passengers, like traveling the same route around the exact same time, was swept away and all of them were lost. So even traveling by water, although it's more pleasant, it's not necessarily safer. So yes, I am pleased with my progress in my Febregency TBR. You should go check out the blog post if you want to see more quotations from the different works I've been reading. Once I finish the Mary Shelley, I will have checked off all the challenges, although I do still have a couple things. We do still have a week of the month left. I would kind of still like to pick up The Rivals by Richard Sheridan. I kind of wanted to read some more Samuel Johnson essays, which Christy, one of our co-hosts from Dostoevsky in Space, she's been reading those. It's been so fun to see her shorts and her videos and her quotations, because it seems like she's really enjoying those. Also, during our live stream reading sprints a little while ago, Tristan was talking about The Vicar of Wakefield, and I have let myself start on Emma. I'm trying to keep this video to a reasonable length, so I'll tell you about my Emma thoughts in next week's video. But one thing I realized is that Robert Martin reads The Vicar of Wakefield. I always thought that Harriet Smith read it, but actually Harriet is reading The Romance of the Forest, which is by our friend Anne Radcliffe. Another interesting aside, I forgot to mention Lover's Vows is by Elizabeth Inchbald, and Tristan mentioned her in his video, and I didn't even know she was an actress who turned playwright. And Tristan mentioned that she might have known Anne Radcliffe, so that's kind of cool. But anyway, back to Jane Austen and Emma. I think it's significant that Harriet, who's a little bit airheaded, is reading Anne Radcliffe, and Robert Martin, who's a very sensible, solid farmer, has made time for Vicar of Wakefield. Christy picked it up after Tristan talked about it, and it does sound so delightful. I read that years ago, but don't remember much of it. And I can't remember who's the author of that. Oliver Goldsmith is that author. Anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling now because I need to sit down and edit this and get it ready to go up tomorrow. Keep an eye out for the Book of Cymbeline on Friday, and make sure you pick up a copy. I might do a fun video, maybe reading a chapter to Cymbeline, we'll see. And then of course, Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, so Lent begins, and I'm doing a Lenten read-along with some other lovely booktubers of The Cloud of Unknowing. But of course our discussion won't be till a little bit after Easter, actually, in April. So there'll be no rush to get that done. Before we skip to April though, it's almost March, which means it's middle grade March. I do have some children's books that I really love to get to, so I'm thinking I might film a middle grade March TBR video. Wrapping up Febregency, our Evelina book club is on Saturday, February 25th. I'll be emailing out the link to our book club video called Discussion. So if you already sent me your email, you should be good. If you did want to join us, you can email emma@bookishprincess.com, and I'll make sure you get the link. Lots of things to remember. And then last thing on my list, kind of fun, in early early March, it is my channel's 10th anniversary, 10 years of YouTube videos on Bookish Princess. So I'm thinking about what to do for that. I did a little letter to the Bookish Kingdom a couple years ago, which I was really proud of, and so I'm thinking I might do another something like that. Although another idea I had was a sort of like behind the scenes about like my video scrapbooking process, you know, my vlogging process and the equipment I use. I don't really love Q&As, so I'm not like thinking of structuring it exactly as a Q&A, but if you guys have any suggestions or any topics, kind of like behind the scenes YouTube stuff that you think it'd be fun to hear me talk about, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon, and until then, stay bookish. Bye guys.